My name's Anna Morrow. I'm the program manager for Midwest Cover Crops Council, and I am very pleased to introduce Amanda Kautz, who's a state soil health specialist for Indiana Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. And she's going to be talking about demystifying NRCS cover crop cost share, fact versus fiction. So, welcome, Amanda, and go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Anna, and thank you all for having me today. Like Anna said, my name's Amanda Kautz. I work for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Indiana, and I am the state soil health specialist. So if you guys were on the webinar that Stephanie McLean did yesterday, she is my counterpart in Minnesota, so we work together quite a bit. So same sort of job. I get to focus full time on soil health, which is a great thing. And I am the technical lead at NRCS in Indiana on any practice that goes into a soil health system. So things like no-till, reduced-till, cover crops, that kind of thing. I did spend a lot of my career pre-soil health specialist in the field in a field office. So I was working directly with farmers, doing site visits, administering farm bill programs, that kind of thing. So talking programs today is a little bit of a trip down memory lane because I used to do this quite a bit. So we're going to go through some kind of basics of what NRCS can offer, and then we're going to go through some common misconceptions. So that's why there's like fact versus fiction. We hear things all the time that are some misconceptions or some misunderstandings about how we can implement cover crops through our programs. So we're going to demystify some of that and get some answers out there that are hopefully helpful. So first, I'm going to go through kind of what's available for NRCS assistance. So we offer two kind of branches of assistance. There's technical and there's financial. And these can go together, or technical can be done by itself. So basically, you're contacting your local NRCS office to set up a time to have a site visit with someone from the office. They will come out and give you advice on what they're seeing out there, how to address that, work towards your goals, that kind of thing. And we can provide seeding mixes, engineering plans, any kind of documentation you would need to implement, the things you decide on during that technical visit. This is also a precursor to if you are interested in financial assistance, we do have farm bill programs that can help provide funding. All of those programs are voluntary, so it is a contract. So once you sign up, you are held to that contract, but it is a voluntary program to sign up for. And we have a couple of those, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, are going to be the ones that we do cover crops through. I threw the Conservation Reserve Program in there, or CRP. It is also a cost share program for different types of conservation practices. So I went ahead and put that there, but the two we're going to focus on today are EQIP and CSP, because that's what we do cover crops through. So the technical assistance branch, like I said, it's a site visit to assist with any conservation concerns you have on your farm. So if you've got a gully in a field, or if you are wanting to implement cover crops, but you kind of want to know where your soils are and what cover crops might be best for that site. Kind of those questions and concerns, as well as addressing goals. And it is totally free. This is your tax dollars at work, so we don't charge consulting fees. It is a free site visit with an employee that can come out and has been trained to work with you on these resource concerns. And we can assist with a variety of things on a variety of land uses. Anything that is cropland, pasture land, forest land. We can talk about confined livestock. We can talk about urban and small farms. There's a whole wealth of things that we can come out and look at. And we can assess soil health, help identify invasive plants, how to treat erosion, look at your pasture health, all kinds of things that are available during those site visits. And we can provide advice and plans from those site visits. So if you decide you want to implement cover crops, we can help you figure out what would fit best in your crop rotation and your soils and on your farm, and give you a plan for that. We can also provide engineering plans. So if you're wanting to install something like a grass waterway where a gully is, we can do those engineering plans for free. And we can do all of this without you signing up for a program. So this is that free tax dollars at work technical assistance. And after the site visit, there is no, if you're just receiving technical assistance, there is no binding contract or anything that means you have to follow the plans. We would like you to follow the plans, but if you decide that that plan's not going to work for you and you don't want to work with us anymore, that's okay. So you've got a lot of options there and you have a little bit more wiggle room. And if we come out and the person that's out there can't help you specifically with what you're looking at, or they don't feel comfortable planning on that land use or something like that, we can try and connect you to someone who can. We have specialists like me that focus on things. So I focus on soil health. We have a biologist, we have a forester, we have grazing specialists. So those people, we all specialize in things. So the person in the field office is kind of a jack of all trades. They have to know a little bit about everything, and they may have specialties that they are better at than others. So if they need some assistance, they can always schedule a follow-up site visit with one of the specialists, and we can always come out and help as well. So we can also connect you to places like the Department of Natural Resources or your local extension office or things like that if you need some more information that they may be able to help with. So some thoughts to make a site visit a success. Like sometimes I've gone out on site visits and there hasn't really been a clear goal, so it makes it harder to do. So here's some things to think about. Be patient. We all have busy times of year, just like farmers have busy times of year at planting and harvest, and they don't have a lot of time to have meetings unless you hop in the combine or the tractor with them. We have busy times of year too with program deadlines and things like that. So it may take some time to get a visit scheduled. So don't call and expect somebody to come out the next day. It may be a week, it may be a couple of days, it may be a month. It just depends on what that office's workload and schedule looks like. And just be patient, plan ahead. And then have a goal or an issue you want to address in mind. It's really hard for us if someone calls and they're just like, well, I just want someone to come out and look at the farm. We can do that. But it helps if you have specific things in mind you want to address, like you have erosion or your pasture isn't as healthy as you want it to be, or your, veggies aren't producing long enough seasons and you want to do season extension or something like that. It would help us keep kind of that site visit focus. But we are whole farm planners. We are trained as whole farm planners. So we will come out and address like what you want us to address. However, be open to new ideas and ask some questions, because as we're walking, we may bring things up that we see on the farm that maybe you hadn't thought of, or maybe you hadn't noticed, or that we think could kind of fit in with that goal that you have. So be very open and ask questions and have that open communication. And conservation plans are what we call the plans that come out of these site visits. And it's basically a master plan to do things in a logical order. So we don't want to overwhelm you because we want you to be successful. So doing a little bit at a time, set out in a logical order is great, because that way you're not getting in over your head. Because I know me as a person, I bite off a lot more than I can chew sometimes, and it gets really frustrating, and we want our clients to be successful. So that conservation plans kind of help keep you on track and make it at a pace that should be doable for you based on your resources. And then remember, we can't give farm business advice. We're out there to address any concerns that you have on your farm that have to do with the natural resources. So we can't give farm business advice. We can't build what we call like cost of farming or cost of infrastructure structures. So if you need a new barn, we can't help with that. But if you need a place to store your manure because you're piling it outside, we can help you build manure storage. So there's a difference between those two, because that manure storage is addressing that resource concern of water quality and where those nutrients from that manure is going if it's sitting outside in a pile versus being in, a dry stack where it's covered and contained. And we can try and connect you to resources that can help if you need some business advice. Purdue Extension here in Indiana and the other land grant extension services have some great, farm business type things. If we know other local farmers that feel comfortable like having their name given out, we can connect you to them. Sometimes we'll suggest local farmers markets, those kind of things. So trying to find you those connections is what we can do with that business advice, but we can't actually give business advice. So very important to keep in mind. So site visits are kind of our first part of how we work with farmers and landowners. And you can just stop there and just have the site visit and do technical. Or if you're looking for some financial assistance to implement the things we decide go into that conservation plan during the farm visit, we can look at these farm bill programs. And I will give the disclaimer, a current farm bill is being worked on. Each farm bill, there are small changes to programs, or sometimes programs are combined or eliminated or things change. So the information I'm giving you right now is very general. I wish I had more information, but I don't. We won't have that full information until that farm bill is done and the policy has been written. So I'm going to give you some general information about EQIP and CSP. These have been in our farm bills for a really long time. So I personally don't think they're going to end up going anywhere, but there could be changes to how they're implemented based on that farm bill. And I can only talk about what exists right now. So it's very general. Once the new farm bill is out and we've all received guidance, contact your local office. They'll be able to talk you through a lot of the specifics of that. But the Environmental Quality Incentive Program at EQIP is kind of where I tend to start people. We look at it kind of as like our fix-it program. So it's one of those, you have a specific resource concern you want to address, and it may be kind of your first step into certain kinds of conservation practices. You may be going from full width conventional tillage where you're chiseling and disking and finishing and doing all the things, and you're looking at reducing that tillage or looking at going to no-till. EQIP would be a great option for that. Or you've never done cover crops before and you're wanting to take your first step into cover crops. Again, EQIP's a great option. So we can implement structural, vegetative, and management practices through EQIP. So we can look at structural things like I was talking about the dry stack for manure. We can look at vegetative practices like those grassed waterways or some critical area seeding in an area that's really erosive, but it doesn't need to be shaped or anything. We just need to seed it and leave it alone. Or those management practices like reducing tillage, no tillage, cover crops, nutrient and pest management. All those things that go into a soil health system would fall under this as well. And we receive funding for different pots of money for different land uses. So there's cropland, forest land, pasture. We receive some money for confined livestock. We receive money for wildlife habitat. And then there's some special national initiatives that also exist. And there's some state initiatives that will differ between states. Sometimes states have an initiative in a certain watershed. So very different from state to state. And I will also give the disclaimer. I talk about a little bit of the program differences between states as we keep going through this presentation. I work for Indiana and I've only worked in Indiana, so I can give you the Indiana perspective. I've tried to build in some perspective from some other states that I had access to information from, but you're really going to get your best rundown from your local office in your state, in your county, because every state handles things a tiny bit differently. And the Conservation Stewardship Program is our other program that we do cover crops through. And I kind of like to think about this as the reward and improve program. So we're building on your existing conservation efforts while strengthening your operation, environmentally and financially, hopefully, and kind of building on things you've already set up. So maybe you're already no-tilling and you want to add cover crops to that, and you want to do more than just the basic cover crops. CSP might be something to look at, and you will get rewarded for that no-till that you're already doing through basically kind of a baseline conservation payment in addition to the payment for that cover crop, what we would call an enhancement that uses that cover crop to address a specific resource concern. And again, we receive money in kind of pots of funding, cropland, pasture, and things like associated agricultural land or farmstead are kind of thrown together. And then forest land can also have associated ag land and farmstead in there, depending on what might need to be done or what you might want to do. So those can all kind of be thrown together, but there's basically 2 fund pools for this one, whereas EQIP had multiple and it was broken out a little more. And again, I have no idea what this is going to look like in the new Farm Bill, but this is how we've been operating off of the Farm Bill that we currently have. So I'm going to dive in a little bit to some differences in programs between states. When I was a district conservationist, I worked in a couple different offices and I always ended up on a state line. So I had people that were in programs in multiple states and we would have to go through these things. So I tried to think back through what I've heard. And each state can decide which practices to offer. So a state can decide to offer a conservation practice or not offer it, depending on if they feel that that resource concern is there to be addressed and how they feel about that practice. So some states may offer conservation practices that your neighboring state may not. So you need to check with your local office to make sure what you want is available. There's not a one size fits all practice list. And each state might prioritize different practice scenarios. So I have Indiana's practice scenarios for cover crop up here. So you can see cover crop right here. And we offer several different scenarios based on what you're looking at doing. We've got a basic, a multi-species, we have a small farm scenario, and we have kind of a strip trial scenario. So that's what we've prioritized and offered. And we have guidance for each one of those for our employees to know how things fit in. And then other states may offer more scenarios, less scenarios, whatever they feel is a priority in their state. So that could be a difference as well. We both may offer cover crops, but we may offer different scenarios. Payment rates also are different based on region, locality, or within special initiatives. So this last year, even in Indiana, we didn't have one state payment rate. We were given localities. So if you were not in a locality, which is, proximity to a large city, basically, you received this payment here that was the state rate. And these are flat dollars per acre. We call it cost share, but you're not getting back a percentage of what you spent. You get a flat rate, per acre. So you know up front what you're going to be reimbursed when that practice is implemented. The Chicago payment rate was a little higher. The Cincinnati payment rate was lower than Chicago, but higher than the state. And then the Indianapolis payment rate was our lowest locality, but still higher than the state. So depending on where you were in the state, it changed. And we have regional payment schedules. So if I'm in the same region as a neighboring state, we have a similar payment schedule. But if I'm 3 states away or that state neighboring is in a different region, payments can be different. So just because, Joe in Illinois got a certain payment, the person in Kentucky may get a different payment than the person in Indiana, then in Michigan, then in Ohio. So definitely go to your local office, figure out what your payment rate would be. And it may be different than what your neighbor's getting if they're farming in a different state, or it may be different than what you get in a different state if you're farming on a state line. And then states can set payment caps on scenarios or practices. So cover crops, Indiana personally has decided that cover crop less than or equal to an acre, the cap is set at an acre. So if you have more than an acre of cover crop, you should be using a different scenario because the scenario is assigned for cost of scale for small farms. We've also set a payment cap on our scenario for strip trials, which is that adaptive management that's down here. We've said you can have one set of strip trials get paid for if you're trying to try out different cover crops. So set those payment caps so that we can use our money the most efficiently, and also so that the appropriate amount of something is implemented and someone's not, accidentally using the wrong scenario for a practice. So that's the differences in payments. Applications also have some differences. So when you're applying for the program, we accept applications continuously year-round all across the country. That's not different anywhere. But each state is going to have different batching periods for program applications, depending on their workload and how they want to prioritize and when they want to put funding out. So plan ahead and contact your office early to give plenty of time for site visits planning. I can tell you right now, if you contact an office in Indiana, we will be planning for cover crops for the fall of 2026, or if you're a farmer that can put in some cover crops after wheat or something like that, we're still looking at the 2026 year. So if you call now, I can't plan cover crops for September. We have already gone through that batching period for our applications for our programs. And you can see I pulled two examples from 2025. Indiana's batching period deadline for 2025 for EQIP was December 6th of 2024. Illinois was February 28th of 2025. So that was just a difference in how the states were handling that batching period. And, we put out press releases, it's announced, but the best way to find that out is to call your local office and always plan ahead as much as possible to give plenty of time for site visits, planning, and not be rushed. And you can put in an application now and be ready to go for next year. And technically, each state's going to have different guidance in seeding rates, maybe species that are acceptable, those kind of things. It's due to the best management practices in their region, which are based on climate, and slight differences in the conservation practice standard, depending on what the state decides to prioritize. So Indiana, when we do seeding rates for cover crops and seeding dates, we divide north and south. This red line here is I-70. That's what we're deciding is the middle of the state. And you can see here, I marked rapeseed because I'm going to compare that to a different state's planning, but you can see, we say you can start planting in August to go all the way through the end of October. And then there's this risky establishment period in like early November, but you're allowed to do it per program guidance. And then I'm comparing that to Iowa, and Iowa is a little further north. And I picked the furthest northwest like seeding district. And you can see here, they actually have some spring seeding dates, and they have a little bit of an earlier cutoff by about a month of the seeding dates here. So that's just due to their climate and what they figured out works for them. They also, I said there's differences in species. They allow winter camelina as a cover crop. We in Indiana have not added that to our like primary cover crops list yet. You can have it in your mixes, but it should be a small percentage. We just don't have the data in Indiana yet to be able to use that, but Iowa does. So they've used theirs. So it's really important to check with your local office on what's allowed and when your seeding dates are and your seeding rates and all of that. So just some reminders and advice to wrap up this little section is applications are accepted year round, but batching periods are set for funding consideration each year. So you need to meet that application date in order to be considered for that funding. Programs are going to be competitive. So we get many more applications than we can fund. So putting in an application does not guarantee that you're going to get funding for these practices. But if you never ask, you never know. So it's always worth doing the paperwork and planning and seeing what happens. And they are ranked based on resource concern and what the practices you're putting in it are, and location and watershed and all these factors, and it puts out a score. And we basically start at the top and start moving down until we're out of money. So we try to fund as many as possible each year, but it is impossible with the amount of applications that we get to completely fund everything. And then practices are paid at a flat rate. It could be per acre, per square foot. Sometimes it's a number like one practice. It's not a percentage of your actual cost. So you will know upfront if you are funded in an application, what money is going to go into that contract. And these contracts are binding. Once they are signed, it is a legal contract with the federal government. So it's very important that you follow through on it and follow that contract and have open communication with your office. And then be patient. I hear all the time that this process takes too long, and it is really long and hard, but it's worth it because you may get funding to put in those conservation practices. It works better with communication. Keep an open line of communication with your office, and hopefully we can get that cost share to you if you're interested. So that's kind of the grand overview of some differences and some financial assistance. And I'm going to dive into kind of some fact versus fiction of some of the conceptions or misconceptions that we've got about doing cover crops through those EQIP and CSP programs, and go over that. Again, I'm giving you an Indiana perspective. I tried to pull in some perspective from other states, but all of this needs to be, have those conversations and that communication with your local office as you're doing things. So first one, If you receive funding for EQIP or CSP, you must follow your state's field office technical guide standard. So that is fact. So we have what's called a conservation practice standard. And this is going to lay out what the conservation practice is, the purpose that we are using the conservation practice for. And you can see cover crop has a laundry list of purposes that we can apply that for. And then this document is going to have general sideboards for that practice to keep you in line, everybody, applying it as consistently as possible. It's also going to have some suggestions, like if we're using it to reduce erosion, it's going to have some suggestions of additional sideboards that may be used to help address that specific resource concern. And cover crops and other practices can be used to address multiple concerns on a farm. So you may be focusing on erosion, but you're also going to be improving organic matter and minimizing soil compaction, and all of those things kind of go together. But a lot of times we try and talk about picking one main concern to focus on. So that is a fact. Each state has one of these. There are slight differences. There is a national standard that comes out, and states are not allowed to remove things from the national standard, but we can make them more restrictive. So sometimes states will have a specialized thing that they want to see in their state, so they may restrict the standard down a little bit more than that national. So they all differ a little bit from state to state, but you must follow it if you're receiving funding through a Farm Bill program. And then next one, if you receive funding for EQIP or CSP, you may not graze the cover crop. So that is fiction. You can graze the cover crop. However, in our conservation practice standard, when a cover crop will be grazed, you have to ensure the planned management will not compromise the selected conservation purpose. So those resource concerns that I just talked about, you have to still be able to address that with the cover crop when you take the forage off with those livestock. And each state's going to have a little bit of a different guidance on how to graze it, how much you can graze it. Here in Indiana, you need to rotationally graze it and have a grazing plan in order to graze that cover crop. And we need to make sure that there's enough of that cover crop left and it's grazed in the correct conditions as to not negatively impact that crop field. And we're still getting those benefits we are trying to address from those cover crops. So you may be asking, what if I have hungry cows? What am I supposed to use? So the cover crop practice standard right here has purposes, and we do not have grazing or livestock forage in those purposes. However, there is a practice called annual forages for grazing systems. It was what was called an interim practice, so everybody was kind of trying it out. It has been adopted into a full-time conservation practice, basically. So it will have a new number and be offered for all the states to pick up here next year. And the main purpose of this planting, the first one, is to provide or increase forage supply during periods of low forage or to extend the grazing season. So that's where we can plant some of those annuals in a crop field, graze them, and we're still getting soil benefits, but we can focus more on the forage and feeding the livestock than we can when we're doing it with cover crops. So this is specifically designed to be grazed. So if you got hungry cows and you want to extend grazing season or provide extra forage, this is what you want to look at. Next one, if you receive funding, you may not harvest the cover crops for grain or seed. So if you have this lovely wheat crop here on the right that you used as a cover crop, it looks really good. And you think maybe you should go out and do what you're doing on the left and combine it. Is that allowed if you got paid for it as a cover crop through a Farm Bill program? And it is a fact you cannot harvest the cover crops for grain or seed. And that is in our practice standard nationally, once you harvest that crop for seed, either to sell as grain or to hold back for next year's cover crop or whatever you're going to do with it, that becomes a cash crop. So we cannot pay for cash crops. That is, a cost of production and a part of your business. So if you have been paid for a cover crop by a conservation practice on a contract, we cannot have you harvest that for grain or seed. So this would apply to cereal rye, wheat, anything that you would be able to harvest seed off of. If you've been paid for it, don't harvest it. That cover crop is out there for those soil benefits and building that soil health, and it can't become a cash crop. So next one is the Field Office Technical Guide standard allows for extended seeding rates. And that is fact. So we have a base rate, which is circled right here in each state that we use. Indiana's is for, let's say, cereal rye is 46 pounds of pure life seed to the acre. So we have that base rate, which is what pops up when our field office staff do the planning and the seeding calculator. But let's say you're trying to get weed control with that cereal rye. We can increase that rate up to 150%. So it can go all the way up to 115 pounds pure life seed per acre because we need a little more biomass out there to suppress those herbicide resistant weeds that we're trying to work on. We can also reduce it by 50%. So that rate can go down. And there's not a lot of scenarios in which we want to reduce the rate of a cover crop, but maybe you're, worried about having a really thick cereal rye stand out there based on the fact that you had tons of leftover nitrogen this year. And we don't want it to go crazy and be too thick for you to plant into. We can take that seeding rate down a little bit. So that's Indiana's. Each state is going to be a little different. You guys will get sick of hearing me say that. I pulled Iowa's because it was readily accessible, and their seeding rate, base rate, is 45 pounds of pure life seed to the acre, so very close to Indiana's. But they allow you to increase it up to 200%. And you are not allowed to decrease it. So they still have a flexible seeding rate, but they don't allow for decreases. So it's going to depend a little bit on what your state guidance is. And that, again, is dependent on what they've seen work and what they feel works in their state. So always a little bit different between states. So don't take a seeding rate from Indiana and try to apply it to a different state or vice versa, because it probably won't match. So next one is if you receive funding, you cannot use pre-mixed seed mixes from a manufacturer or a dealer. We all know cover crop seed dealers have, pre-mixed mixes. They might be a little cheaper than custom mixing a mix. So can you use those? And it's fiction that you cannot use them. So you can use them. You just need to make sure to check with NRCS if it meets the standard. So check to make sure all the species are okay, because in some states we have some restricted species due to the fact that they can escape and become invasive plants. We may have species that we have not signed on to as a cover crop yet because we are still gathering data and wanting to make sure it's effective and it does not become an invasive and we aren't causing more problems by putting it out there. We may have a higher or a lower seeding rate for that species when it's in a mix. So we're pretty flexible. Just make sure you check with NRCS and make sure there's no red flags in that mix before you order it. And they can even help you figure out, what you would need to order to meet that seeding rate. So communication and looking at those seeding rates is helpful, and you can use those mixes. You just need to talk to that local office. So the standard strictly defines cover crop seeding dates is our next one. And that is fiction. So again, each state's going to be a little different. Here's what we've got for Indiana. This is a snapshot of just a few species that we have in our cover crop seeding calculator. And this is our seeding date sheet. The dates in green are good for the entire state. We should not have an issue when seeding during those dates, and you are considered within seeding date. We also have these yellow squares with R in them. That means you are allowed to seed, but it's very weather variety seasonal dependent and it's riskier establishment. So technically you're still within seeding date, but you're taking some risk on yourself. We also have frost seeding dates that there are a few species will allow to be seeded December to February, and those are still considered within seeding date. We do have to increase the seeding rates by 25%. In order to guarantee success, because we are spending taxpayer money on these conservation contracts and paying you with that. But it is an option. And then all this information down at the bottom of the seeding date, we've got some things that are like subtext, and we have additional seeding dates for the southern part of the state, south of I-70. Sometimes you can get some north of I-70. It's going to talk about bolting risk, dates for Hessian fly, for wheat, dormant seedings, lower biomass production, all of that. So this is all very important, but we are pretty flexible based on how the season's going. And we've got some extra dates there for some establishment that can happen. We also have If sufficient moisture, you can establish. But if it hasn't rained in 3-4 weeks, you probably don't want to try, and there's no rain on the way. So we can be pretty flexible. Just work with your planner. Iowa, I pulled up again because I was already in that calculator. They have what they call prime dates, which are like those green dates that Indiana had. So that's your main seating windows. They also have start and end dates in the yellow, which is probably riskier establishment, would be my assumption based on the color coding and the timing of those dates, but you're still within seating windows. So they are fairly flexible as well. And they have their state divided into multiple regions. Indiana just has the 2 regions. So it's going to really depend on how your state does it. I know there's another state out there. I can't remember what it is. It's based on, the type of cover crop you're planting more so than where you are in the state. So check with your local office, but those seating dates are slightly flexible. And then if you receive funding, there's a minimum acreage for cover crop contract that can be contracted, and that is fiction. We work with all sizes of farms. This picture here is a small farm that they're flail mowing to kill the cover crop, and that is certainly an acre or less. And we worked with them on cover crop through an EQIP program. Cover crops can be applied on large and small acreages depending on the needs of the farm. We've done them in high tunnels. We've done them in small urban farms. We've done them on farms like this that are, small specialty crop farms, all the way up to thousands and thousands of acres of corn and bean production. So it's very need dependent on the farm, but there is no minimum acreage that can go into a contract. And some states even offer that small farm payment scenario. I highlighted that Indiana offers for what we would consider very small plantings, which is an acre or less. So that is out there. We work with all sizes and all kinds of farms. So there is no precluding anyone from applying for cover crop cost share on any size of farm. We just use the appropriate payment scenario. So wrap up on this fact versus fiction for Farm Bill Programs Edition is what I'm calling it. Cover crops need to be implemented per the practice standard in your state. So make sure you're following that practice standard and working with your local office. Cover crops can be grazed, but it has to be done in a way they're still addressing the identified purpose. And if your purpose is livestock forage, take a look at that annual forages for grazing and see if your state offers it. And each state's going to have slightly different guidance for how you're going to graze those cover crops, what your stop grazing is going to be, how you're going to divide those paddocks, all of that. So check in with your local office and make a plan if you do plan on grazing the cover crops that you've been paid for through CSP or EQIP. Cover crop cannot be harvested for grain because at that point they become a cash crop, and we do not pay you to produce a cash crop. We are paying you to address resource concerns. So we're paying you for those soil health benefits we're getting from that cover crop. So you cannot harvest that for grain. The cover crop standard allows for a range of seeding dates and seeding rates. Again, check with your local state. Each state's a little different based on their local guidelines, what they've seen work and their climate. So we all have our own guidelines, but they are all a little flexible. And there's no minimum acreage for cover crops under Farm Bill programs. I've done anything from 1/10 of an acre under a couple of high tunnels all the way up to like 5, 6, 7,000 acres in a big corn bean operation. So obviously the technical side of that is different, but the program side is the same. We just pick the appropriate practice scenario and drive on. The big farm would get that basic scenario or multi-species scenario. The small farm's going to get the less than 1 acre or less scenario. So those costs of production on scale are going to be recognized, and we're going to be able to help both producers. So if cover crops through a program or even technical assistance are something you're interested in, this is how you would find your local NRCS service center if you're not aware of where that USDA service center is. The service centers in Indiana house Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and normally the local county soil and water conservation district, which is a state county organization that we share office space with a lot of times. Sometimes they're called soil conservation districts in other states. They've got some different names, but they have the same purpose. A lot of times they're co-located with NRCS. Some offices may have other USDA agencies in them as well. So if you go to the National NRCS website and scroll down, you'll find this box that says find your local service center. You select your state and it'll pop up a box to select your county. I selected my home state and county, and it gave me my service center address, the phone number, and the main contact, which is normally the district conservationist that is within that field office or covers that field office. We have a field office that covers every state, county, every county in the US, the territories, every state has multiple, service centers. We have every county covered. Sometimes it'll be in your county, sometimes it'll be an adjacent county, just depends on how it's all broken up. But there is a main contact there that you'll be able to contact and get some assistance with. So that is what I have for you guys today on kind of the demystifying the cover crop cost share. Hopefully that helped answer some questions or some misconceptions that are out there. Everybody, has different things in every state, but that communication with that local field office is really the most important. And every state is out there and wanting to help. We want to get conservation on the ground. NRCS's motto, as cheesy as it sounds, is helping people help the land. And I can guarantee you that our field office staff will be super excited to get out from behind their desk and actually go out and walk the farm with you. I remember those were my best days when I got to leave the paperwork behind and actually get out on the farm and talk with our farmers and our landowners. So they will probably be more than happy to put the paperwork and the computer down for a day and come chat with you. So make sure you contact them if you have any questions. And if you guys have any questions for me, I am glad to answer them. Otherwise, that's what I have for y'all today.